going to hand down a judgment this week in a case in which Ukraine accused Russia of violating an anti-terror treaty by funding pro-Russian forces, including militias who shot down a passenger jet. And the reason this is uncomfortable, Emily, for the U.S., obviously, is you can't, on the one hand, be like, yay, ICJ, I agree with your ruling when it comes to Russia, but boo, ICJ, I disagree with your ruling, and I'm not going to abide by it when it comes to Israel. You don't get to pick and choose. Of course, I mean, you shouldn't be able to pick and choose, but of course they will pick and choose. And it just becomes blatantly obvious the level of hypocrisy and how they just use international law for their own ends. When it's convenient, they, oh yes, the international rules-based order. And when it's not convenient, then they just ignore it. And even beyond ignoring it, the fact that in the wake of the ICJ saying Israel must increase humanitarian aid to Gaza, people are starving to death and you must do better. And our response on that very same day is to cut funding to the #1 aid agency on the ground in Gaza to the benefit of the Palestinian people. It's not just we're going to ignore the ruling, it's we are actively going to flout and thumb our nose at the ruling.
And I think this is where
there was a court case. It hasn't gotten a lot of attention, but here, working its way through the U.S. courts, accusing Biden of complicity in genocide. And we actually just got a ruling yesterday. That is pretty interesting. Let's go ahead and put this up on the screen. So a federal judge just ruled the Biden administration does appear to be supporting a genocide. They go on to say, but he must dismiss the case under the political question doctrine despite preferring otherwise. So this judge is saying basically like, because of the political questions doctrine, I can't actually do anything here, but he backs up the ICJ ruling, which found that Israel is plausibly committing genocide in the Gaza Strip. Let me read you a little bit of the judgment here so that you guys can hear the way that this judge lays this out. They say, similarly, the undisputed evidence before this court comports with the finding of the ICJ, indicates that the current treatment of the Palestinians in the Gaza Strip by the Israeli military may plausibly constitute a genocide in violation of international law. Both the uncontroverted testimony of the plaintiffs and the expert opinion proffered at the hearing on these motions, as well as statements made by various officers of the Israeli government, indicate the ongoing military siege in Gaza is intended to eradicate a whole people and therefore plausibly falls within the international prohibition against genocide. It is every individual's obligation to confront the current siege in Gaza, but it also is this court's obligation to remain within the metes and bounds of its jurisdictional scope. In conclusion, the judge writes, there are rare cases in which the preferred outcome is inaccessible to the court. This is one of those cases. The court is bound by precedent and the division of our coordinates branches of government to abstain from exercising jurisdiction in this matter. Yet, as the ICJ has found, it is plausible that Israel's conduct amounts to genocide. This court implores defendants, that would be Joe Biden, to examine the results of their unflagging support of the military siege against the Palestinians in Gaza. So basically, you know, this is kind of a mixed bag, Emily, for the Biden administration. On the one hand, the judge says, listen, I can't do anything because of the political questions doctrine, but to have an American judge rule that the ICJ is correct and implore Biden directly to cease his aid of what may well be a genocide of the Palestinian people is nonetheless a pretty extraordinary outcome.
And a refresher on the political questions doctrine, I pulled up Ballotpedia here. They write, the traditional expression of the doctrine refers to cases that courts will not resolve because they involve questions about the judgment of actors in the executive or legislative branches and not the authority of those actors. So Biden himself, people who are making decisions at the Pentagon, they say, for example, cases involving foreign policy or impeachment often raise political question concerns. So foreign policy, which is so heavily controlled and influenced by unelected people at the Pentagon, at the Department of Defense, more broadly by people in the executive branch, fall under the political questions doctrine, which is pretty interesting in this context where you have a court decision by the ICJ that's in question. It makes sense and then it doesn't make sense because, again, you have a court decision that you're talking about. So it's an interesting ruling for sure, and this doesn't make anything better for Joe Biden.
Yeah, and they have another challenging situation that's going to unfold this week, which is the ICJ is set to rule on another case, this one not about Israel, this one about Russia and Ukraine. And so the U.S. has, I mean, again, the level of gaslighting from this administration is outrageous. First of all, they tried to say, well, you know, the ICJ didn't find that Israel was guilty of committing a genocide. Well, no shit. That wasn't the question that was before them right now. So they've completely tried to dodge. They said, oh, actually, the ICJ backs up our position on, you know, Israel and Gaza, and that, which is, you know, insane. If you read the ruling, it's the total opposite of what the U.S. has been claiming and the support that the U.S. has been giving to Israel. But put this up on the screen. So judges at the World Court are going to hand down a judgment